Do you believe that the greatest from me story ever told wasn't written in the gilded chronicles of kings, but was instead etched by a broken man in the dusty archives of a dying city? The story you are about to hear is not about a saint in a halo of light. It's the story of a survivor, a man who lost everything and, in the abyss of his despair, stumbled upon the blueprint of hope and the devastating price that had to be paid for it. This is not a sermon. This is a journey into the heart of doubt, of grief, and of a truth so immense it could either shatter a soul or redeem a generation. We are going to take you to the port city of Atheria, a place where faith had become a luxury item and truth was a faint whisper in a loud and bustling market. And I promise you, the greatest surprise isn't in what this man saw, but in why he was the only one who could see it. The answer will change how you look at the power of a story and perhaps at your own purpose in this life. Before we pull back the veil on the secrets of Atheria, let's do something small to connect us all in this moment. Pause for just a second and comment below where you are listening from in the world and what time it is for you right now. From New York, London, Manila, or some quiet corner of the earth, let's begin this journey together in the same moment in time. The port city of Atheria was once the jewel of the kingdom, a vibrant tapestry woven with the threads of commerce and culture. Ships with sails of 100 different colors once crowded its harbor, their hulls heavy with spices from the sun-scorched east and bolts of silk from the opulent west. The air then was a symphony. The laughter of merchants, the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the cries of vendors hawking their wares. That, however, was a melody from a bygone era. Now Atheria was rotting from the inside out. The brilliant paints on the grand facades of the merchant guilds were peeling, revealing the drab, salt-stained stone beneath, a testament to neglect and indifference. A sickness far more insidious than any plague was coursing through the city's veins, a virus of cynicism. The nobility, insulated by their wealth, schemed only for greater power. The priests in their temples offered empty rituals, their words hollowed out by repetition, and the common people, their faces etched with the daily struggle for survival, were too weary to believe in anything beyond their next meal. At the heart of this creeping decay stood a place almost entirely forgotten, the great archive of Atheria. This sprawling stone building held no gold or jewels, but a treasure infinitely more precious, the city's memory. And the sole guardian of this memory was a man named Kalin. He was not the stooped, white-bearded scholar one might imagine. Kalin was still a young man, but his eyes held the ancient sorrow of a much older soul. His title was Archivist, a position once held in the highest esteem, now reduced to a glorified caretaker of dusty relics. His duty was to transcribe, to preserve, to protect the countless scrolls and stone tablets that chronicled 1,000 years of Atherian history. Kalin was a man of logic, of verifiable fact. For him, history was what was written, what was sealed, what could be proven. But his own life had been irrevocably fractured by a truth that defied all logic, the finality of death. A few years prior, a virulent plague had swept through the city, and in its indiscriminate wake, it had stolen his beloved wife, Lyra, and their little daughter, Elia. From that day forward, Kalin had entombed himself within the archive. The profound silence of the scrolls became his only companion. The musty scent of aging parchment and forgotten stories was the very air he breathed, for it smelled of his own soul. Each night he would return to his empty house, a hollow shell where the echoes of Elia's laughter seemed to cling to the walls, where the armchair Lyra once occupied still held the faint impression of a life now forever absent. It was in this long, gray winter of the soul that the strange occurrences began. It started subtly. While transcribing an ancient text on maritime law, a single word on the page seemed to shimmer, to glow with an inner luminescence. He rubbed his eyes, blaming the flickering candlelight, the long hours. A week later, as he was cataloging the dynastic histories, a phrase began to repeat in his mind, a whisper that did not belong to him, and the darkness will not overcome it. He dismissed it as a figment of his grief. The wounded mind, he told himself, can play cruel tricks. He was a man of reason. He would not be swayed by delusion. But the whispers persisted. They grew clearer, more insistent. They were no longer single words, but complete sentences, fleeting images that would flash through his mind the moment his fingers brushed against a particularly ancient scroll. He saw a barren field burst into impossible bloom. He saw a strange new star ignite in the night sky. He was terrified. The internal conflict was a torment. The logician in him screamed that he was losing his grip on reality. Yet a deeper part of him, a part he thought had died with his family, felt an inexplicable connection to these echoes from the void. He was standing on the precipice of the unknown, unaware that these whispers were merely the opening notes of a symphony of destiny, one that would drag him through the very depths of truth and despair, only to show him what lay on the other side. The torment of the whispers intensified, evolving from a gentle haunting into a relentless siege upon his senses. They were no longer fleeting images he could dismiss as tricks of the light. One afternoon, as a cold winter rain lashed against the tall, stained glass windows of the archive, Kalen was meticulously restoring a brittle papyrus scroll, a complex astronomical chart. As his fingers, stained with ink and preservation oils, traced the faded lines of constellations, a vision struck him. It was not a flicker, but a full, immersive reality that tore him from his surroundings. He dropped the scroll, stumbling backward, his stool clattering on the stone floor. The book-lined walls of the archive dissolved. Before him stretched an infinite crystalline night sky. In its center burned a single star, brighter and more magnificent than any he had ever known. And beneath its benevolent light, a prophecy, clear as a tolling bell, resounded not in his ears, but in the very core of his being. From a place of no expectation, a child shall be born. His light will be a compass for the lost, and his name will be Hope. The vision vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving Kalen gasping for air, his heart hammering against his ribs as if trying to escape. This time it was too real, too profound to be explained away. In a moment of profound weakness, driven by an impulse he could not comprehend, he sought out the only friend he had left in the world, Liam. Liam was the captain of the city watch, a man of action, a pragmatist hardened by the city's grim realities. He was the embodiment of the new Atheria, a man who trusted only in the strength of his sword arm and the height of the city walls. Kalen found him in the training yard, his face flush and beaded with sweat from a grueling sparring session. Pulling him into the relative privacy of an alcove, Kalen recounted everything, his words tumbling out in a disorganized, desperate rush. He spoke of the whispers, the star, the vision of the child of light. Liam listened, his thick brows furrowed in a mixture of concern and pity. When Kalen finished, Liam placed a heavy, calloused hand on his friend's shoulder. "Kalen, listen to me," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I know what you have been through. Grief can conjure ghosts that seem as real as you or I. A child of light. It's a beautiful story, the kind we tell children to help them sleep. But out there," he gestured towards the city beyond the walls, "what we need are stronger fortifications and sharper steel. Let the past go, my friend. Live in the world that is, not the one in old scrolls." Liam's words were a douse of icy water, leaving Kalen feeling foolish and utterly alone. But his humiliation was far from over. The story of the Archivist's vision somehow leaked out, perhaps from a curious guardsman who had overheard their conversation, and it reached the ears of Alara. Alara was a name that carried weight in Atheria. She had once been Kalen's revered mentor, the brilliant scholar who had taught him the very principles of logic and historical analysis. But life had savaged her, too. After her husband, a political idealist, was killed in a meaningless uprising, Alara had changed. She abandoned the archive, reinventing herself as a popular philosopher. Her lectures, held in the opulent halls of the nobility, were always packed. Her central thesis was sharp and bleak. Hope in saviors and miracles was a poison. Hope is a sweet opiate, she would declare. It makes our legs forget how to walk, our hands forget how to work, and our minds wait for a deliverance that will never arrive. She confronted Kalen in the archive, the first time she had set foot in the building in years. She did not approach him as a former mentor, but as a prosecutor. Her face was a cold, impassive mask. "I have heard of your little fairy tales, Kalen," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "I am disappointed. I taught you to find truth in evidence, in the recorded past. Now you peddle prophecies, selling false hope to the desperate. You are seeking comfort for your own loss in dangerous fantasies. Stop. Stop before your words cause real harm." This confrontation created a new, devastating layer of conflict. Kalen was now trapped. His closest friends saw him as a man lost in grief. His respected mentor saw him as a dangerous fool. He was caught between the rational world he was trained to uphold and the mysterious spiritual world that was desperately trying to reach him. The seed of self-doubt planted by Liam was now being watered by Alara's scorn, and it began to grow into a suffocating vine within him. After the verbal lashing from Alara, Kalen retreated further into his shell. He tried to block out the visions, to immerse himself in the mindless, mechanical work of transcription. But the visions had a will of their own, and they began to shift, to darken. The hopeful images of a star child and blooming fields receded, replaced by a new, persistent, and deeply unsettling figure. It was a man, but he was no king, no warrior. He wore the simple, worn tunic of a laborer, and his face was a landscape of sorrow. His shoulders were slumped, not with weariness, but as if he carried an invisible, crushing weight, the weight of Atheria itself. Kalen saw this man walking through the marketplace, and a strange invisibility cloaked him. The bustling crowd swirled around him, yet no one truly saw him. He saw him being mocked by street urchins, shoved aside by impatient merchants. He saw him being turned away by those he sought to help, being denied and forsaken by his own kin. What terrified Kalen most was the profound sense of recognition. In the man's eyes, he saw his own reflection. It was the same hollow ache of loss, the same soul-deep loneliness of being utterly misunderstood by the world. This vision was not a distant prophecy. It was a mirror reflecting the most shattered parts of Kalen's own heart. He could feel the burden on the man's shoulders as if it were his own. He felt the sting of rejection, as if the scornful words were directed at him. This intimate, personal connection shattered his last defenses. He was no longer trying to deny what he was seeing. He surrendered to it. Compelled by a force beyond his understanding, he began to write. He unrolled the finest, smoothest vellum, uncorked his pot of darkest oak gall ink, and began to chronicle what he saw, not as an act of will, but as a desperate, frantic release. He wrote not to warn or convince, but to try and make sense of the agony that was now intertwined with his own. He wrote of the sorrow bearer, the one who would take upon himself the city's failings and griefs. His quill flew across the page. He shall grow up before us as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He has no form or comeliness that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. As he wrote these words, Kalen didn't realize he was weeping until his tears fell onto the vellum, blurring the fresh ink. A profound shift had occurred. He was no longer a passive observer of history. He had become a participant in this tragic narrative, a scribe not of the past, but of a future agony. He was sharing in the suffering of his subject. He could not possibly know that chronicling this pain was only the beginning. He was about to face a trial that would transform these abstract prophetic words into a brutal and bloody reality. As Kalen was immersing himself in the sorrowful visions of the mysterious servant, another image sliced through the melancholy, sharp, specific, and terrifyingly immediate. It was not a symbol to be interpreted. It was a direct and urgent warning. One night, sitting alone in the vast, silent darkness of the archive, the familiar walls and shelves of scrolls suddenly dissolved. In their place, Kalen saw the black, churning surface of the sea at night. He saw a fleet of warships, their sails bearing not the sigil of any known kingdom, but the terrifying emblem of a coiled black serpent. He could hear the rhythmic, deathly splash of oars cutting through the water. And then he saw fire. Great balls of flaming pitch launched from catapults, arcing through the night sky toward the city. He saw them crash into the western harbor, the district of wooden warehouses and the tightly packed, humble homes of the fishing families. The vision was rendered in horrifying detail, from the sound of splintering wood to the distant, terrified screams of the victims. A whisper sharp as a shard of glass cut through his mind. The ships of the Black Serpent will come on the night of the new moon, and their fire will consume the western harbor. Kalen gasped, snapping back to reality, a cold sweat drenching his tunic. The new moon, that was just 2 nights away. This was not some distant, abstract future. This was imminent. A primal fear, a desperate sense of responsibility seized him. He had to do something. Casting aside the memory of past ridicule, he scrambled from his chair and ran to find Liam. He found his friend making his late-night rounds atop the city walls. Kalen grabbed Liam's arm, his voice a torrent of urgent, frantic words. "Liam, you must believe me this time. I have seen it. A fleet, ships with a Black Serpent emblem. They will attack the western harbor on the new moon." Liam looked at Kalen, his expression a conflict of emotions. He saw the genuine terror in his friend's eyes. It was not the look of a madman, but of a man convinced of a horrible truth. "Still, Kalen," Liam said, his voice strained with the effort of remaining calm. "Our sea patrols have reported nothing. The scout ships have seen only empty waters for leagues. If I were to mobilize the entire watch to the western harbor based on a vision, do you have any idea what would happen? It would cause a panic. The people would flee their homes. If nothing happens, I become a laughingstock and the authority of the watch is undermined. And if there is a real enemy, they could use the chaos as a diversion to strike elsewhere." Liam's thinking had been deeply colored by Alara's pragmatic philosophy. To him, maintaining order, preventing chaos, was a greater duty than chasing after what he considered to be ghosts. He hardened his voice, a captain speaking to a civilian. "I cannot risk the safety of this entire city on a nightmare, Kalen. I'm sorry." He turned and continued his patrol, leaving Kalen standing alone on the battlements, the cold night wind whipping around him, feeling as desolate as the empty sea. His powerlessness was absolute. He held a terrible burning truth in his hands, but it was rendered useless by the disbelief of those in power. He was utterly isolated. His best friend had rejected him. His mentor despised him, and now he was forced to be a silent witness to a coming massacre. He looked down at the western harbor, where the small, warm lights of the fishermen's homes twinkled in the darkness, their inhabitants sleeping, completely unaware of the doom that was sailing toward them. A cold, bleak despair washed over his soul. The night of the new moon fell upon Atheria with a dreadful, heavy stillness. Kalen did not sleep. He sat in the highest window of the archive, his gaze fixed on the black expanse of the sea, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. Then it began. A single distant alarm bell rang out, followed by another and another, their panicked tones overlapping. Almost immediately, the western sky erupted in a ghastly orange glow. The screams began faint at first, then growing in volume, a terrible chorus mingling with the sounds of splintering timber and the roar of a ravenous fire. The ships of the Black Serpent had arrived. The fire, fed by the dry wood of the warehouses and homes, spread with terrifying speed. The Western Harbor became a raging inferno of chaos and death. Kalen's prophecy had been fulfilled, down to the last horrifying detail. Liam and the City Watch rushed to the scene, but they were too late. Their efforts were reduced to a desperate, futile battle to contain the blaze and pull survivors from the wreckage. But there was no vindication for Kalen. Being right brought him no glory. It brought him something far worse: fear and fury from the very people he had tried to save. The story spread through the panicked city like the fire itself. The Archivist knew, he saw it coming, but instead of hailing him as a savior, they saw him as an omen of disaster. Why didn't he do more? Why wasn't he clearer? The vicious whispers began. The true climax of Kalen's agony arrived at dawn. The fire had mostly been subdued, leaving behind a smoldering, blackened wasteland. Kalen walked out of the archive, a numbed automaton, and made his way toward the devastation. There, amidst the rising smoke and charred remains, he came face to face with Alara. Her face was no longer a mask of cold philosophy. It was contorted with a grief-stricken rage. She stormed towards him, her eyes bloodshot and wild. She wasn't screaming at him for being wrong, she was screaming at him for being right. She grabbed the front of his tunic, her strength surprising him. "Do you see it?" she shrieked, her voice hoarse, spittle flying from her lips. "Do you see the consequence of your precious truth? Your words didn't bring salvation, they brought panic." She jabbed a finger toward a makeshift morgue where weeping families huddled over shrouded forms. "There were those who heard the rumors of your prophecy and tried to flee. They trampled each other in the narrow alleyways. They died not from the fire, but from the chaos you created. Your truth is just as toxic as any lie, Kalen. It kills just the same." Her words were the final twisting blade in his already shredded heart. He stood frozen. He was right, but his righteousness was stained with tragedy. He had wanted to save lives, but had inadvertently caused deaths. The paradox was a cruel, unanswerable torment. Does truth always set you free? Or is it sometimes a burden too heavy to bear, a flame that illuminates but also consumes? Kalen sank to his knees in the ashes, feeling more broken than the burnt-out city around him. In the aftermath of the firestorm, a deathly silence descended upon Atheria, but none was more profound than the silence that enveloped Kalen's soul. He returned to the archive, but the scrolls, once his refuge, now felt like accusers. He sat motionless in the center of the great hall, drowned in a sea of guilt. Alara's accusation was a relentless echo in his mind. He wasn't a prophet, he was a curse. He became convinced that he, not the Black Serpent ships, was the true source of the destruction. He was utterly broken. Days bled into one another. The city began the slow, arduous task of clearing the rubble. And in the depths of Kalen's despair, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, a soft knock came at the archive's heavy oak door. Kalen ignored it. The knocking persisted, gentle but firm. Finally, with weary resignation, he unbolted the door. Standing before him was a fisherman, his face a roadmap of hardship, his hands holding a small loaf of bread, still warm from the hearth. Behind him stood his wife and their two small children, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and gratitude. The fisherman spoke, his voice rough but steady. "We heard your words, Master Archivist, not because we believe in magic, but because when you warned Captain Liam, we heard the sound of real fear in your voice." He explained that his family, along with a few others who lived on the very edge of the harbor, had caught wind of Kalen's warning. They had been skeptical, but the genuine terror they had sensed in the rumors was enough to make them act. Quietly, in the dead of night, they had dragged their small fishing boats up a hidden creek behind a rocky outcrop. They had lost their homes, their nets, everything they owned, but their families were safe. The fishermen pressed the loaf of bread into Kalen's unresisting hands. They had not come to worship him as a prophet. They had not come to beg for new visions. They had come with the most valuable thing they had left, to share it with a man they sensed was suffering as much as they were. They simply came inside and sat on the floor of the archive, sharing his silence. Soon another family arrived, and then another. They brought a few salted fish, a handful of roasted yams. They formed a small, quiet circle in the vast, lonely hall. This was not the acclamation of a crowd. It was the deep, silent communion of fellow survivors. The warmth of the bread in his hands, the quiet presence of these souls, became the first embers of light in the profound darkness of Kalen's spirit. Just then, the door creaked open again. It was Liam. His face was gaunt, his armor still grimy with soot. He looked at Kalen, at the families, and then his gaze fell to the floor. He offered no words of apology. Words were meaningless now. Instead, he walked silently to a corner, picked up a broken broom, and began to help Kalen sweep away the debris that had blown in from the fire. That simple action spoke more than 1,000 apologies. It was an acknowledgement. It was the beginning of a mended faith. Kalen looked at the small circle of humanity around him. For the first time in days, tears welled in his eyes. But these were not tears of guilt or despair. They were tears of a fragile release, of a minuscule hope being rekindled from the ashes. He was beginning to understand that even when truth brings pain, it can also, in the most unexpected ways, sow the seeds of compassion and community. In the newfound quietude surrounded by the simple kindness of the survivors, Kalen's tormented mind finally found a measure of peace. The crushing weight of guilt began to lift, replaced not by joy, but by a serene emptiness. And it was into this sacred, silent space that the final vision came. It did not strike him like a storm. It unfolded gently, like a scroll being unrolled by an unseen hand. He saw the sorrow bearer again. The vision was clearer, more devastating than ever before. He saw the man beaten, humiliated. Then he saw the strange, terrifying method of execution he had glimpsed before. The man was nailed to a great wooden cross, his arms outstretched, suspended between heaven and earth. He witnessed the blood, the final ragged breath, the lonely death. The pain of the vision was still suffocating. But then the impossible happened. Out of the darkness of that death, a light began to dawn. It was a light that did not come from the sun, but from within the very form of the sorrow-bearer. The light grew blindingly brilliant, pushing back the shadows, and Kalen saw him, the man he had just watched die, standing. He was alive. The wounds were still there on his hands, his feet, his side, but they were no longer marks of defeat. They were emblems of a victory so profound, it defied all understanding. It was at this moment that the final stunning twist was revealed. As Kalen stared, awestruck, at the resurrected figure, the vision shifted. A beam of that brilliant restorative light shot forward, traversing space and time, and fell directly upon Kalen himself, sitting in his own ruined archive. He felt the warmth of that light on his skin, a warmth that seemed to travel straight to his soul. And a voice, the same voice that had whispered to him from the very beginning, now spoke with a clarity that was both majestic and intimate. He will come to bear the sorrows of the world. His sacrifice is the ultimate truth. The voice paused, letting the words settle. Then it continued. But you, Kalen, your purpose is to bear his story. Your grief for your family was a shadow of his sacrifice. Your loneliness was an echo of the rejection he would endure. Without a storyteller, there is no story for the world to believe. Without a firekeeper, the flame of hope dies before the dawn. Your purpose was never to be understood in your time, but to ensure that this story would survive it. Kalen's eyes flew open. The immensity of the revelation washed over him. His entire journey, the loss of his wife and child, his isolation, the mockery, his powerlessness, none of it was random. It was not a punishment. It was a preparation. He was not a prophet meant to change the world. He was, true to his title, an archivist, chosen to preserve and transcribe the most important story in all of human history. His role was both infinitesimally small and cosmically essential. He was not the savior. He was the one chosen to keep the lamp lit until the Savior arrived. This revelation was his liberation. The burden of guilt evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of peace and purpose. He finally had the answer to everything. After the final vision, a new man was born within Kylan. The grief for his lost family did not vanish. It remained a permanent scar upon his heart, but it was no longer an anchor drowning him in despair. It had been reframed, imbued with meaning, a testament to the sacred purpose he had been given. He no longer wrote with frantic desperation. He wrote with reverence. Each character he inscribed upon the vellum was weighed and considered, for he knew he was not merely recording a prophecy, but preserving a legacy. He organized his scrolls, creating a coherent narrative arc, from the vision of the child of light to the haunting figure of the sorrow bearer, through the betrayal, the death on a cross, and culminating in the glorious resurrection. He understood now that they were all chapters of the same magnificent story. The fishing families became regular visitors to the archive. They no longer brought food, for with the help of the community, they were slowly rebuilding their lives. They came now to listen. Liam, too, was a frequent guest. His pragmatism was now tempered with a newfound humility, and Kylan began to teach. He would unroll the scrolls on the clean-swept floor of the Great Hall and begin to explain. He did not teach like a prophet delivering edicts from on high. He taught like a storyteller sharing a tale that had transformed his own life. He showed them how the visions of sorrow and hope were intertwined, how the sacrifice of the sorrow bearer was not an end, but the beginning of everything. He explained that their purpose, like his, was not to wait passively for a miracle, but to live in the way the story taught, with resilience in the face of hardship, with compassion in the face of indifference, and with unwavering hope even when the darkness seemed absolute. He was passing the torch. He was turning the survivors of a tragedy into the first keepers of the flame. The archive was no longer a tomb of forgotten memories. It had become the heart of a small but vibrant community, a community forged in the fire of a shared story. Looking at the attentive faces before him, from the wide-eyed children to the weathered elders, Kylan felt a quiet, profound joy. His transformation was complete. From a victim of grief and a helpless observer, he had become a teacher, a sower of seeds, an active and powerful storyteller. He knew his scrolls would one day crumble, and he himself would return to dust. But the story he was entrusted with, now held in the hearts of others, would live on. Centuries passed. The city of Atheria rose and fell, was nearly erased by war and time, and was rebuilt again. The names of Kylan, Liam, and Alara faded into the mists of history, but the story did not. During an excavation at the foundation of the old city, modern-day historians discovered a carefully sealed stone chest. Inside, miraculously preserved, were a collection of ancient vellum scrolls. They were Kylan's records. Though damaged by time, the core narrative was unmistakable. The story of a decaying city, of a broken archivist, of the vision of the child of light, and the stunningly detailed account of the sorrow bearer, his suffering, his death on a cross, and his glorious resurrection. And most remarkably, they found the final passages, Kylan's own revelation about his role as the one who bears the story. Kylan's legacy was not a monument of stone or an empire of gold. His legacy was a story that had survived the storm, passed from one generation to the next, sometimes as a whisper, sometimes as a roar. It became an undying testament to the power of faith in the midst of despair, to the meaning that can be found in suffering, and to the vital importance of the storytellers, humanity's quiet firekeepers. This discovery created a bridge across the chasm of time, connecting Kylan's distant past with our present. It reminded us that our human struggles, our fears, and our hopes are fundamentally unchanged across the millennia, and that the power of a story told from the heart can indeed conquer time itself. The story of Kaelin teaches us something profound. Sometimes, our greatest purpose in life isn't to move mountains or to become the hero acclaimed by the masses. Sometimes our greatest purpose is simply to keep a single candle burning in a mighty wind. In the midst of the chaos, the loss, and the doubts of your own life, perhaps you are not meant to be the main character, but perhaps you are being called to be the storyteller. Perhaps the pain you have endured and the lessons you have learned are meant for you to one day share with someone who needs to hear it. Someone lost in the dark who needs a single flame to find their way. So what is your story? What is the flame that you are keeping alive in your heart? If Kaelin's journey from a broken soul to the firekeeper of an immortal legacy has touched you in some way, we invite you to become part of this community. Click that subscribe button and join our channel as we continue to uncover these forgotten legacies, these stories that have the power to heal and to change lives. Because every subscriber is one more person willing to listen and one more person ready to tell their own story. Thank you for listening.